Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be able to be here at FEIA. And it's even more of an honor to be here with our strongest allies from U.S. Europe, U.S. France, U.S. Canada. And so, Nick, we just want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to join you and talk about a very important subject. And as we have listened to the different panelists today, one of the things has become very clear is that the conversation always is not just about the opportunities, but who are going to be able to finance those. And so today's discussion, although very, very timely, we know that 2023, now 2024, and now as we move to 2025, is going to be a very big turning point, especially on carbon emissions. And so one of the things that we see as a defining moment is not just to act, but to lead on how we can continue the green energy transition at the speed and scale necessary while fostering growth and equity across the world. And so that scaling and that speed, we believe, comes through work that will have to be done by agencies like the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Exim is our official export credit agency. We are an executive branch agency of the U.S. government with one single mission, and that is to support American jobs by facilitating the exports of U.S. goods and services. And so one of the things we have to also remind, it is not just about supporting our goods, it's also supporting our foreign buyers who want to purchase those goods and services to be exported. You know, since its establishment 90 years ago, Exim has played a critical role in fostering economic opportunity for U.S. companies, small businesses, and for partner nations that our companies do business with around the world. As an institution, we offer direct loans, loan guarantees, and insurance products, all backed by the full faith and credit of the United States to support those exports of goods and services. And so in 2019, when U.S. Exim was reauthorized, one of the things that became loud and clear was the work that needed to be done on the financing side. Exim is an institution that was authorized with a lending cap of over $135 billion. In the last 3 years, we have done over $25 billion, in all total about $35 billion. So we have $100 billion left of that lending cap. So being at meetings like this gives us the opportunity to meet those companies that are looking to scale and to meet and understand more about the technologies and the work that has gone on here in Europe and around the world. The thing that is so interesting for us is that at US Exim, we're very, very simple. It's that when the private sector lenders are unable or unwilling to provide financing, we are charged to fill in the gap for American businesses by equipping them with the financing tools necessary to compete for global sales. And we always like to say, we don't need you to just compete, we need you to also win. But also at Exim, sustainability is more than a priority. It is embedded in our mission. It is embedded in our mission from our charge from our U.S. Congress as well as from the administration. So it is within those mandates that we have been working through opportunities to drive the global energy transition by advancing clean and renewable energy projects. We believe our track record speaks for itself. In 2021, we had funded only $11 million in climate-related transactions, supporting only 50 U.S. jobs. 2022, we grew to $175 million, supporting 550 jobs. In 23, we authorized over $950 million in climate transactions for supporting 4,700 jobs, a tenfold increase in just 3 years. And then in this last fiscal year, we've doubled our investment in energy and environmentally beneficial exports, growing from $1.1 billion in 23 to a record of $2.3 billion, our largest ever clean energy investment. This transaction that we did represents over a fourth of our portfolio this year and includes a $1.7 billion in renewable energy projects. We believe that the data speaks for itself. We know that having decarbonization success stories are emerging across industries, which unite them is the strategic integration of innovative technologies and collaborative partnerships. Projects like our recent investments in Malaysia, which incorporates cutting-edge carbon reduction technologies, demonstrates how industrial processes can cut emissions by as much as 30%. We also have been introducing new tools. We believe that it is very important that we have to have these tools in order for us to make the kinds of strides that we need to continue to do for the future. We know that we have been also in the forefront in the financing of nuclear energy projects for more than 5 decades. And I know that there is going to be numerous conversations here this week and that has been taking place, especially at all of our COPs, around the transformation that this sector has. And we know that since COP27, we have demonstrated our commitment on numerous key initiatives. Most recently, especially in the nuclear space, we have authorized nearly $100 million to advance Romania's SMR power projects under our engineering multiplier program. You know, these projects are very complex and they require a great deal of money. But what they require most is advocacy. And beyond that advocacy, we understand it has to be about public-private partnerships. So I believe that the work that all of us have been discussing here today and tomorrow, we'll continue to see how we can not only facilitate, but how we can accelerate the financing that is going to be needed. And so we look forward to continued conversations around our financing, but also to talk about how in America we have also built programs around what we call initiatives around what we call Make More in America to strengthen our supply chains with these types of projects. We know that programs like what we call EMEA also would then lead to scaling opportunities around this particular sector. So we understand that we all need to seize the moment, we need to be innovative, but more importantly, we need to act. And that's why the financing and the partnerships and collaborations that we do with our G7 partners, our G20 friends, the Quad, APEC, ASEAN, you name it. Whether you're in a multilateral perspective or whether we look at this from a bilateral perspective, we know that one agency, one country, one industries, one sector is not going to be able to do it alone. It's going to require all of us working together for us to reach the goals that we need. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming to listen to this very interesting conversation, actually listening to people that make the change happen. So 2024 is going to go down as the year with the highest carbon emissions ever recorded. So we've made some progress. I feel like, especially after COVID, after the pandemic, there was a renewed sense of urgency, and we saw some actions like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Next Gen EU fund that really helped accelerate finance the carbon transition. But it also feels like we're hitting a snag. So let's have a chat here and discuss all these elements with the 3 guests I have here. Just next to me, Philippe Kehren, the CEO of Solvay, Jean-Marc Ollagnier, Chairman EMEA of Accenture, and Aurélien Hamelle, President for Strategy and Sustainability at TotalEnergies. So Jean-Marc, maybe ask you first to set the scene for us of all the progress that has been made, those IRA, Next Gen EU, all this progress that has been done until 2023, 2024.
So thanks, Charlotte. Maybe the lack of progress as well, as you mentioned, but
we'll go to that afterwards.
No, I think the way we look at it at Accenture as we serve large-scale enterprise. My conviction for many years has been we are not going to decarbonize the whole world without a very significant role of business. And that seems obvious, but we know that this energy transition requires multi-stakeholders approach. We need to coordinate different people in order to ensure on the ground this energy transition is really happening. But I think, and we believe, like I hope my colleague here, that the business has a key role to play. That's why what we do every year is we survey and we also look at data, the reporting data we have now around carbon emissions, to look at the real progress we are making. There is always a balanced view here. You will see there are some progress, and I think it's good to see. When you look at, especially in the last 4 years, there have been plenty of reason for business to do something else than sustainability. But when you look at the data will suggest that the business remains more and more committed to their net zero agenda. Today, we have 37% of the G2000, so the survey focused on the 2,000 largest companies in the world, which are the ones that contribute to the emission. 37% of them have a commitment to net zero on scope 1, 2, and 3. More interestingly, 65% of them have a commitment on net zero for scope 1 and 2, which demonstrates the complexity of scope 3, which is certainly a topic we're going to come from. And this has increased every year. It has increased every year, including last year, which demonstrates the commitment of the business to contribute for their part to that. Now, coming back to where we are around the world, Europe is still leading. So European companies are still leading, despite everything we say around some of the European bureaucracy or whatever. And I will say this year more than ever, which I find interesting, because today, if you compare to the 37% of average that I mentioned of G2000 company committed to scope 1, 3, 2 and 3, 64% are committed in Europe, which is a very significant percentage compared to what you see in North America and the rest of the world, which are half of that number, which demonstrate that all the regulation in Europe has created some kind of momentum. And obviously what we see in China and US to catch up may be something important as well. So that's a bit on the high level, and I'm happy to comment in more detail. The real issue is the pace. Are we on track to achieve that when you look at the current level of reduction of emission? And the answer is clearly no. Even for the companies that are doing the right things, there's very few companies that are reducing carbon emission today at the pace required to achieve 2050 agenda. And that demonstrates that we need to accelerate. We have all the lever. Many of the industry, especially professional services, B2C industries, have generated the technologies through energy efficiency, electrification to achieve net zero. It's not that simple, but I think we have, and that will be, I'm sure, a discussion with my colleague here, we have the heavy industry that needs help. Because first, they are the scope 3 of many of the others, but they also are not on track today because of business model, pricing of green steel, pricing of energy, but also the decarbonization technology is much more complicated. It's just not electrification only. It's going to require storage, hydrogen, green gas type of thing, which is much more complicated. And that's why those industries are a bit behind in terms of pace. But this is very important that overall we help them. So that gives you a bit of a picture of where we are, and I'd be happy to get into any more detail.
And we will going further. Philippe, if I can ask you, of course, you're the CEO of a large chemicals company, Solvay. I believe you were one of the companies that invested thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act in the US as well before the split of the company. Can you just tell us how you saw that as an opportunity and the kind of work that you're doing to decarbonize your industry?
Yes, maybe a few words first, because it's true that CO2 emissions are increasing year after year. It's not the case for the industry. The industry has been working for a very long time on CO2 emission reduction. If I take the example of Solvay, and that's very important to understand because it also explains why it costs more and more. Versus 2005, you remember 2005, it's the implementation of the Kyoto Protocol. We started to measure at this time. We reduced our CO2 emissions by a factor of 3. So it's true that today we are in the hard stuff. The low-hanging fruits, they're gone. And so what we have in front of us costs a lot of money, and it's the whole question on how can we finance it in a world we are in all of our businesses at Solvay, competing at a global scale. And one of the main roadblock to decarbonize is unfair competition. Unfair competition, because how can you invest, for example, in Europe, when you have, when you decide that it's okay to import the pollution? And when we say we are decreasing our CO2 emissions in Europe, in the industry, it's also partly due to the shutdown of the industry. So is this what we want? My answer is no. No, because our vision at Solvay is that we should move to a model where more and more we produce regionally. We have plants everywhere in the world. We are selling everywhere in the world. So we should have short, supply chains. But to have these short supply chains, you need to make sure that you have fair competition. And how do you do that? But sometimes you can use the IRA, so you put a lot of money to make sure that you can have production in the US.
That's not fair competition, is it?
No, I mean, it's not fair competition, but it's needed. It's needed because we don't have fair competition. So in Europe, we are trying to find ways as well, but we are too slow. We're shutting down the industry in Europe because we are not taking the right measures. So this is really what we need to talk about, is we need to have the industry. The energy transition does not mean that the industry must disappear. We are producing essential products, essential chemicals. If we are not there, there is no window. So there is no energy saving program. You don't have double glazing, whatever. There is no low consumption tires. We would consume 30–40% more fuel. So it's needed to have those products. Now the whole thing is, how do we produce them? And how do we make sure that we can have this fair competition?
I think the point of competition is really interesting, because things that might be good for decarbonization, say electric cars. Well, there's a lot of cheap Chinese electric cars coming, which would be good as a goal to reach the targets, is not good for the European car makers. So it's a really difficult thing to reconcile, isn't it? The industry goal and the decarbonization goal, right?
And that's because, this industry is heavily subsidized in China. That's the only reason why we can have cheaper Chinese car. And if we have incentives, we fuel this whole chain, by the way, because we incentivize people to buy those cars. So that's really a political decision. We are producing rare earth at Solvay, rare earth to produce electric vehicles. Today, 100% of the rare earth to produce permanent magnets is for electric vehicles, come from China, because it's subsidized, but we can produce them at the right price.
Yeah, and we'll come afterwards to the conversation of reshoring and cutting short the supply chain, because that's a really interesting conversation. Aurélien, let me come to you as well, because of course you are a key player in all this transition. TotalEnergies, of course, you were just Total, but you changed the name in 2021 to reflect the strategy shift and how to signal the diversification towards cleaner energy sources as well. So just explain to us how that's happening and how you're supporting industries as well in that shift.
Well, thank you for having me today. Just sharing some good news, and there are also bad news in the broader discussion on climate change. It is true that we've witnessed in the last 5 to 10 years, certainly accelerating in the last 5 years, a decoupling between GDP growth, people getting richer, countries getting richer, and use of fossil fuels. So you have less and less carbon emissions that go into adding $1 of wealth for humanity, basically. So that's good news. There is the decoupling, and basically what we need to do is to accelerate that trend, because it's not going fast enough. It's going in the right direction, something people often overlook, but if you take the International Energy Agency base scenario, let's say, for energy scenarios called STEPS, that one scenario, STEPS, in 2016, just after the Paris Agreement, had an implied increase in temperature by the end of the century of 2.7 degrees. That was 8 years ago. The same STEPS scenario this year, 2024, has a 2.4 degrees implied heating at the end of the century. That's 0.3 degrees better in the course of 8 years. That's around 420 gigatons of CO2 less that goes into the atmosphere. So that's actually significant. So I agree, the industry actually, especially in Europe, has gone in the right direction. Now, how do we do? It's all a matter, has been discussed, of ecosystems. It's not about climate change and fighting climate change is around energy. Energy is 80% fossil fuels today, still on the face of Earth, and it's about the energy transition. But the energy transition is about energy ecosystems transitioning. You need to change the supply. You need to change the demand, and there are things that we can do on just one side only. I'll start with that, for instance. we, as an industrial player, we produce oil and gas, now we also produce electricity. As an industrial player, we emit a lot of methane. Methane, is a gas that's now in the public discussion, and that's a good thing, because methane is the second largest heating gas in the atmosphere after CO2. Methane is very much short-lived. It stays for 10 years, around 10 years in the atmosphere, but it has a bigger heating effect than CO2. It's in the course of 20 years, that's 80 times more than CO2. So methane comes from three sources on the face of Earth, let's say from human activities. One is oil and gas production. There's coal too, actually, that emits methane. The other one is waste, and the third one is breeding and agriculture. We are in the oil and gas industry. So how do we address that? First, on our own, we set targets. We've decided to reduce methane emissions in our operations by 80% between 2020 and 2030. We've just reached minus 50% this year. And then you need to track progress. We've just decided to install permanent methane detection equipments on all of our upstream oil and gas production sites around the globe by the end of 2025. But then, because that's a matter of how you move the needle, it's good to do something for your own company, and we're doing that. We have targets, we monitor the progress, we have action plans for that. But then you need to bring the whole industry with you. And what we've done is we've contributed a lot to something called the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. It's called OGDC. It was launched at COP28 in Dubai a year ago. And through this, we are working with 54 oil and gas companies, both state-owned, national oil companies, and privately owned companies, so that together we all set targets to reduce methane emissions by the end of the decade, and these companies taken together represent almost half of the oil and gas production worldwide. So when you do that, when you collaborate, and I think that's key in the whole energy transitioning order of thing, when you do that, when you collaborate, you can actually move the needle for a system at large and not just for your own company. That's one of the starting places.
Because you talk about the oil and gas industry in particular, can I ask you, because we've seen some of your competitors in particular being very much under pressure from some investors, not being happy with the shift towards more green targets and kind of rolling back on some of these objectives as well. So how do you balance it? How do you make the financial argument for this transition as well to your investors?
It's a very good point, because as a company, we will only invest in greener sources of energy, and I'll get to some details around that, if our investors, because they own the company at the end of the day, will let us do so. And it's true that you need to have an investment case if you're going to do that. So the way we've done that in the last 5 years very significantly is we allocate roughly 2/3 of our investment to oil and gas. Doing that, lowering methane emissions, lowering CO2 emissions in our operations, and then we allocate around 1/3 of our investments to low carbon energy. It's around between $4 and $5 billion a year. That's a lot of money, even for a company like us, that go to low carbon electricity, integrated power. And the way we do that, so that our investors will be okay for us to do that, especially when other oil and gas majors either have not gone down that route, for instance in the US, others elsewhere in Europe have gone for that route and then gone elsewhere more recently. The way we do that is we want to have a distinguishing model. We're not going to become a utility. Utilities have more than their role to play in the transition. But we want to offer a different model to our investors where we integrate along the value chain. What we've done in oil for 100 years, gas for 50, 60 years, we want to do in electricity. Basically, we integrate in production, transformation, transportation, sale of energy products. It's been oil, it's been liquefied natural gas, and now it's going to be power. It is power today. And by doing so, you integrate a value chain. You do take risks at some points in the value chain, but that's where you capture value. And we have that legacy in our business, that we are very good at capturing value in the value chain of the energy system. We're doing that with power, and by doing that, we offer our investors double-digit returns, as we say. We're close to the 10% return on our electricity business that we report on a standalone basis. And because we can generate revenues, profits out of that business that we are constructing, our investors are happy for us to do so, because investors, they want us to have a long-term transition vision, and they're very supportive of that on all sides, including on the other side of the Atlantic. Frankly, investors, even though maybe they've gone more quiet in this respect, they like that. So they let us do that, but at the same time, we offer a return. And that's very important to be able to move the whole system if you want to have an investable business case.
You all alluded to the fact that it's really expensive to make those investments for that transition, but at the same time, it was the low-hanging fruits until now. So it's the hard part starts now, right? So does that mean you're going to need even more money? And then where does that money come from?
I think the problem is not the financing itself, the money. I mean, there is enough money in the world to finance a good project. The problem is to find the best projects. And what is a good project is a project that allows you to do your energy transition and at the same time stay competitive. So if it costs you, 2 or 3 times more to put double glazing, no one will put those type of windows, and we won't do the right projects. So we need to stay competitive at the same time. That's why, as industrial, when we look at those projects, we don't look at the return on investment. Doesn't make any sense, because I can define a baseline where costs are increasing forever, and the return will be fantastic. What we need is to preserve the level of competitiveness. And so it means you need to find the right project, and it's not always the same type of project, because it very much depends on what is available locally. In Brazil, I can use bagasse. Bagasse is the residue of sugarcane. I cannot do that in Europe, obviously. So in Europe, I have to find something else. I can find recycled waste. I can find waste wood, biomass, whatever. So you need to find the right project. And then you cannot succeed alone, clearly. I mean, you cannot succeed alone. You need to be supported by the whole value chain, meaning the customers of your customers, and so on. We also need to be ready to support, as end consumers, these type of projects. And you need to be supported by the policymakers as well, so that they put the right money at the right place. Because the main problem that we have is that, you mentioned IRA, and you're right, our IRA is it's always this story of the carrot and the stick. IRA is a carrot, and it makes the investment possible. In Europe, we have only sticks. So we invest not to pay additional costs. This does not make a business case. If you want to invest, you need to generate value, not to avoid paying more.
And that's reflecting reality. So a barometer of investment from European industrial groups, and they say it's from McKinsey that 37% of European investment went to the US, and 33% went to Europe. So European companies are investing more in the US than Europe.
It's not linked only to energy transition. I think if we separate a bit the topic is, as I say, we have many industries that have an affordable way to achieve and make progress. Even my industry, tech sector, will be the next big wave of decarbonization through electrification, because we are going to have to do that, and we are doing it. But I think what is different, and I have a lot of sympathy for Philippe because we know each other, is, when you look at the heavy energy intensive industry, they are facing something very unique in terms of competition, where energy price in Europe, and it has been worse after this Ukraine war, are more expensive than in China and in North America right now. That's the reality of where we are. So we ask them not only to decarbonize, which is already quite of a challenge, but also to be competitive with one of the major sources of their competitiveness being energy at a higher price. So they have more of an effort to do. That's why I was saying it is visible today that this industry is making a lot of effort. And I'm talking about chemicals, steel, cement, all the really energy intensive industry, which needs some level of support, because either we want that kind of industry across the world, as you say, in North America, in Europe, in Asia, but we have to accept that this difference of energy price is quite of a problem, first, of competitiveness, and after you ask them to decarbonize, I say, well, let's be competitive first to survive, and after we'll eventually decarbonize. That's a very unique situation Philippe and some of his friends are facing.
And that's a bit, again, I'm going back to the electric car situation, but you had an industry that...
That's another topic, because cars, you have different things. In the energy transition is touching everything, so that's what makes it interesting. No, it's a more of a competitiveness issue and subsidy issue. So yes, you also have this kind of thing.
It's about competitiveness, but I guess...
I agree, but it's a different kind of solution. I agree that in some industry, you are facing some unfair competitiveness, and that's something to be addressed as well.
But there's other industry, I guess, the wind farm industry, the batteries, all these industries that are at the forefront of the transition have taken a battering recently. So how do you convince an industries to continue investing, continue push for the transition? We see that some of the industries that have done it actually paying the price for it now.
I think, look, when you look at it, when you are, as I say, in different sectors, much less complicated, we see energy transition on being sustainable as a part of doing business. If you want to attract people, if you want to sell product to customer, you better do the right things for your environment, because that's a criteria to be successful in business, is also to do the right things for what is around us. And I think I can tell you, when you talk to young generation, to customer, this is also an important thing. So do the right things for business, make a lot of things. So now, as I say, many industry can do it, and we are doing it. When it's about your survival as a company, well, you need to survive first, because if you don't survive, you can be clean with no plant, as you say in Europe. We're going to be clean, but I'm not sure that's the right solution. So that's why we need, and that's beyond what we can discuss here, but we need to define industrial policies that make some decision around how much chemical industry we want left in Europe, for example.
And so on that, there's a new European Commission that's just starting. We had the Draghi report recently, very much linking European competitiveness to decarbonization, etc. So what do you hope to see from the new Commission in terms of priorities, in terms of more carrot and less stick, I guess?
Yes, you're right. I mean, and we were all together in February in Antwerp, and we signed a declaration to say, we want to continue and even speed up with the Green Deal, but we need to have an industrial deal. Otherwise, the Green Deal will be done by shutting down the plants in Europe. So we had this declaration. We had the Draghi report, which I think highlights, that we have a big problem in Europe. And again, I mean, I look at it in a very balanced way, because Solvay is a global player, so we're producing everywhere. So we look at what's happening in Europe versus what we have elsewhere. We had the election, so today nothing has happened since February. You see, I mean, this is the scale we're talking about. I mean, we need quick decisions. So I think there is an awareness that builds up. There is good intentions, but there need to be acts now, really acts. And when I say act, is to make sure that we can, in fact, compensate this unfair competition, that we can also not always add, more regulations, but also put regulations that will support, the industry. I have a customer that wants me to produce from recycled material. Well, I can do it in China, but not in Europe, because it's considered as a waste. So we have the regulations that we don't need, and we don't have the ones that we need. So we need, and this is about trust, It's about talking together and trusting each other. There is not enough trust, I think, between the industry and the policymaker. That's the key point.
And also, I guess you need some political will behind it, and you need countries to take the lead, whether it's European country members or whatever. And you have France got its own domestic political drama, Germany having their own election soon. So do you lack this sort of leadership at a country level and leaders to actually push things through in the EU at the moment?
We cannot say that we are living in a world that is completely certain and with a clear vision and so on. That's for sure. And for industrials, it's a big problem not to have this clear visibility. We can build it. I mean, we have good ideas. We don't need big political decisions. We can make it work with the policymakers. In line with the targets. I think we all have the same vision. We want a cleaner world. We want a competitive world, and so on. We as industrial have a lot of things to propose.
If we look again, back to the US, of course, the big change happening in 2025 is Donald Trump coming back to the White House. How much of a shift might that be? You said drill, baby, drill. I don't know if that's good news for TotalEnergies or not. But what kind of shift also taking the US out of the Paris Agreement, all these kind of changes I said he would do? What does that mean overall for reaching those targets?
Well, I guess I'll start because of the drill thing. First, something to keep in mind, the US have never produced so much oil and gas domestically from the US ground as under the Biden administration. Today, the US is the very large, dominant energy champion of the world. They produce tons of oil. They are the main producer of oil around the world before Saudi Arabia. They're the main LNG, liquefied gas producer around the world. So I'm not sure it will change a lot, frankly, just because there's a political motto during the campaign. The US will stay a dominant supplier of oil and gas for the US, hence the cheap energy that they have, and for the rest of the world, namely Europe. Actually, Europe buys a lot of American LNG and oil too, and some of that goes to China, actually. Now, having said that, when you look at what's happening in the US and the new administration coming in, there is a very strong business momentum for the transition that's not going to disappear. I'm very much confident about that. There's one thing that's connected with the policy mix. They have a lot of carrots in the US, certainly, with the IRA. Some of the IRA will be adjusted, but the IRA in the US has benefited a lot of Republican districts, and this is not going to disappear because a lot of jobs, US jobs in Republican-held districts are supported by the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is not going to go away, and it is true that a lot of companies, and we do that too, we invest a lot in the US. The US have always been a very good place to do business and invest. It's not new and it's not related to the IRA only. But there's been a boost, and there's a boost to electricity generation. We are a big player in Texas. We don't produce oil in Texas. We are in the gas and LNG business in Texas. We're the largest US LNG exporter, actually, as a company. But we are growing very significantly in the power business in Texas. We install a lot of wind farms, solar farms, and they have a lot of sun, and they have a lot of wind. They have a lot of available land in the US, which we don't have in Europe. There's a lot of land in the US that's available, and Europe is very much dense, so you have less land to do your solar and wind farm business. So we do a lot of that, and there's a lot of demand because of very strong industry, very strong service economy, very strong data centers demand. That's going to be driving a lot of the growth in power demand in the US, especially in Texas, in Virginia, in some places where it's there's a great case to make investment in clean electricity, because all of the the Magnificent Seven, as they call them, just for the sake of the anecdote, the oil majors were called the Seven Sisters back 50 or 60 years ago. That's disappeared. They are the majors now. We're one of them, but now we talk about the Magnificent Seven, the GAFAM, Tesla, and that drives so much power demand, and they have very strong targets to be carbon neutral in 2030, 2040, that there is a business case for suppliers of energy like us to invest in the US. That's what we lack in Europe. And one thing about what we've just discussed, I think what's key is that in the hopefully new policy settings that we'll have in 2025, which is a very important year because that's the year where it happens or not. That's a very important year, 2025, because there's the Draghi report, because there's public talk about that. The one thing that's very important is technological neutrality from the European policymakers. The European regulations have been very much policy oriented, which is not a good thing, because you need to look at the cost merit curve, what's the cheapest available technology to support the industry and decarbonize at the same time. And if you want to go for the very state-of-the-art high-tech solutions that cost a lot of money to start with, that's a bad place to start with. You need to go for the cheapest sources of technology that you can work upon collectively. I think that's going to be key in the 2025 debate here.
Yeah, and I can give an example about this technology industry, specifically in North America, as you mentioned, because it's interesting to see, the tech sector in the US has been front leading in terms of value creation, as we all know, but frankly also in terms of growth. This sector, which is highly regarded by everybody else, is going to consume a lot of energy. It's consuming already a lot of energy and will consume way more with AI, and I'm sure that will be some question around that. I think the good news is that, as I see in other sectors, the large-scale companies, the one you mentioned, are the ones that are pushing the industry to decarbonize.
And they're investing in nuclear, aren't they?
Exactly. That's very interesting to see that they are not only requesting more renewable energy on low carbon energy, but they are also innovating with the industry. Typically, your example of nuclear is quite an interesting one. They are ready to co-invest, or sometimes even to invest to do that. But it has been the same on renewable, on the way they mixed wind and solar through storage in order to really push the industry in terms of decarbonization. This is, I think, the right role that leading company can play. And this is certainly a good example that I think whatever administration will continue, because they are playing for the next decades. They are not playing for the next round of political election. And I think that's really important to see, because I see that in North America, I see that everywhere else. And that gives me the confidence that things are still moving, even though there are some challenges, as you know, Charlotte, right? Because there is a lot. But there are also good things happening.
Yeah, and the energy need from these tech companies and those investment in nuclear is because, of course, the expansion of AI and their servers that need energy.
Exactly. AI is a disruption which we are watching, because AI consumption on the current technology, though, is going to be astronomical. But you know what? The current technology will change, and we will find ways to leverage this AI technology, which seems to have some benefit for many industries, with a lower consumption, because the current technology will give us a level of consumption which is unsustainable. So we're going to have to fix that as well.
But on AI, if you can, Kehren, because of course it's changing for manufacturing, for supply chain. Enterprise AI is already at play, and I actually have a panel tomorrow on this as well with C3AI, which should be very interesting. How much of a game changer is it in terms of climate transition, etc., as a tool as well?
For us, it has a massive impact. So it's not so much AI; it's more digitalization and machine learning. Clearly, we see that in our plants. We have plants that are 150-year-old. So of course we improved over the years, but still, we are continuously improving by putting, measures, machine learning, and then we can reduce the consumptions of raw material, of energy, reduce the maintenance costs, because we're doing predictive maintenance and not preventive maintenance anymore. So this is all, delivering tremendous results.
How about in the oil and gas industry as well? The AI revolution.
Yeah, so there's AI on the demand side of energy, and then there's AI on what it means for us as an energy producer. The impact likely is going to be huge. It's like computers in the 1990s. There was a famous phrase back then, like, we see computers everywhere, but not in productivity figures. And I think AI is at this stage today, so it's everywhere, not only in the discussion, but in our day-to-day lives on a personal and professional basis. But it is going to have a huge impact, because we'll see that in productivity figures. It's going to have a huge impact on how you manage energy demand. Managing energy demand is one of the one of the significant solutions to make better use of the existing energy, basically. So managing energy demand, having smart grids, how you make electricity, flow from one place where it's not needed at any given time to a place where it's needed at night, during the day, weekend, weekdays. That's going to have a huge impact there. It's going to have a huge impact on how we maximize energy production. In oil and gas, actually, there's the use of AI today on how you look at reservoirs and how you're going to do exploration, which means you'll have more targeted exploration. You'll be more productive in terms of what you look for. And then there's going to be AI for all of the new sources of energy. And you'll be able to map resources of where there's better sun radiation, where there's more wind, what is the wind pattern. Wind is very much for those who follow the news of the offshore wind and the wind industry. There's a phenomenon these days happening in Germany, namely in Northern Europe, where there's no wind, there's little sun this time of year. And basically Germany has had to run on a lot of coal and gas to get its electricity, more than 80%. The UK the same, actually, because there's been no wind in Scotland, or very little wind in Scotland. And so AI is going to help predict that with reasonable advance, so that you can adjust and make better use of energy again. You need to have very significant grids and infrastructure. AI on its own is not going to do the trick, because it's going to be an enabler, but then you need very brick and mortar infrastructures. You'll need a lot of electricity cables if you want AI to be able to move electrons from one place to the next.
We've talked about Europe and the US, but we haven't talked about China and India. What kind of impact, what kind of players can they have, the new challenger, the new disruptor coming next? What's happening from their side of things in terms of the transition?
Obviously, when you look at the energy mix, it's pretty different. When you look at coal usage, it's mainly an Asian topic. So I think energy security for those countries is linked to coal, and coal is something that are not ready to give up, because that's their energy security for those two countries, and that's going to be there for quite some time. So we're going to have to see, as part of their energy transition, how much they can build and do the new things. They are very active, frankly. When you look at the investments they are doing, it's pretty interesting. But there is a base of coal for electricity generation that has nothing to do compared to the US and to Europe. So the timing of transition, and that's when you talk to the climate change people around the world, they've taken that into account, that it's going to take a longer time for them. That's why there is more pressure on North America and Europe to make progress, because we cannot ask them to go at the same pace. They are not going to discontinue coal because we ask them to discontinue coal tomorrow morning. They are going to have their own pace of transition. And what is very unique to them is centrality of coal for a generation of electricity for ages. And that's not going to change in the short term.
We're getting towards the end of the conversation. Net carbon zero 2050. How hopeful are you?
I think it's too late between you and me. I'm very hopeful, but I really think we need to move faster, and I hope that we will be able to do it faster. We took the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. We will have our first site that is carbon neutral by 2030. It's one of our biggest sites, and it's in Brazil. They are already at minus 95% versus 2005. That's why I'm saying, the last 5% are super expensive. This is why I wanted to make the point earlier on. The last step, so we are moving out of coal. Coal is the most competitive historically. We've been, implementing the plants on the coal mines. We don't have coal anymore, since 30, 40 years ago. So we need to find in Europe, we need to find in Europe, we need to find again, the right source of primary energy that is available and low carbon. But the last step will be, I think, from a process point of view, electrification of the process, because those are the last CO2 tons that we have to abate. So this means that we have competitive, at least for my industry, competitive low carbon electricity. This cannot be done without nuclear. I'm sorry. I don't see how this can be done without nuclear. So countries that don't have nuclear electricity will have a problem with their industry for sure.
Aurélien, hopeful.
Well, something I wanted to point out is every year we do an exercise where we run scenarios and we present scenarios on the energy possibilities of the future up until 2050. It's called the TotalEnergies Energy Outlook. We just presented a month ago the sixth edition of that. And when you look at let's say the trends scenario, which is one of the three, which is what's happening today and where do we see the energy world heading, and therefore the world heading, you see that back to China is leading the way, and China has set a 2060 net zero ambition. They're on track to get there. Because what does it take to get to net zero? Let's look at what are the big emitters around the Earth. The energy-related emissions on Earth are almost 40 gigatons, 40 billion tons per year of CO2 equivalent. The main emitter is electricity generation. That's 14 gigaton. 75% of these emissions come from coal. Back to this discussion we just had. And coal is going to stay in the mix because that's cheap. That's a sovereign source of energy that you can have without relying on others, basically. And because a coal-fired power plant lasts for 40 years, so nobody's going to shut down coal-fired power plants. So priority number one is to go to lower sources of electricity generation. And that the world knows how to do it. We have the technology, they're available in terms of cost. Now, the next thing, and it's been mentioned, we need to electrify the use of energy. Because it's one thing to have low carbon electricity, that's great. But if you have nothing to use that's just wasted energy, and you can't have that and you won't have that. So what you need is more electric cars, China is selling 50% of electric cars as we speak in all new car sales. Europe is below 20% for the time being, likely going to be increasing next year. There are good signs in this respect. The US is around 7% of EV cars in their sales mix. And there are then a few other places where you have that. So electrifying transportation is going to be key. That's a collective challenge, and the world is not on track in this respect. And then the next one is the industry. And when you look again at the cheapest available technology, heat pumps, industrial heat pumps for, let's say, medium heat or medium high heat, that's available, and that should be prioritized over things that are walk on the moon technologies, basically. So going in the right direction, not fast enough, and I think it takes a huge collective effort with policymakers, with those who consume energy, with those who supply energy, we do both actually, to be able to get at the right place. Today, the world is not on track to meet the net zero 2050. Europe is not on track to meet its net zero 2050 targets, but we can, and we will certainly accelerate altogether.
Jean-Marc, final words.
Yes, I think that's the right question at the end. I think the reality is, to be confident around 2050, we need to look at the fact that we are not on track. So let's face it, today, if nothing changed, we are not going to achieve it. So I think we need to have all of this collective effort on this mobilization. For me, I believe still that a couple of disruptive technology could make the difference. And I'm thinking about carbon storage. I'm thinking about battery and electricity storage. I'm thinking about hydrogen or green gas, new nuclear. I think we need something, and probably more than something, maybe 2 to 3 things that can be available in the next decade in order to scale some of the current issue we are facing. And I think that's going to be the collective wisdom and R&D effort of the world. Are we on track to find something that can be game-changing for 2050 or not? I think for me could make the difference. I think if we don't have that, it's going to be harder. So we need to bet on a couple of technology. When you look about a decade or two, that's a reasonable bet. We don't know yet what it is, but we can think that mankind is wise enough to find something that will make the difference. Because today, with a lot of good intention and also a lot of challenges, we are not on track.
Aurélien Hamelle from TotalEnergies, Philippe Kehren, Solvay, and Jean-Marc Ollagnier from Accenture. Thank you so much for your insight and your time.